This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Fire Committee. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on social media and use the hashtag AssemblyFire for this meeting. Please may I remind participants to silence your devices. The main item on the agenda today is arson offences in London. However, we have a few short items of business first. Can I now ask our clerk, Diane Richards, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received, but in accordance with Standing Order 2.4, Assemblymember Cooper will be participating in the meeting virtually.
Thank you. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members, and can I also ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interests in any specific items listed on today's agenda? Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 18th of March 2025? Thank you. Can we note the completed, closed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence sent and received? Thank you. Can we also note the actions taken by the former chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members to agree A, the committee's letters to the Home Office and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government regarding the building safety regime and remediation, and B, the Action and Ambition London Fire Brigade's culture report? Thank you. Can we also note the responses received from A, the Home Office and the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government for committee's letters regarding building safety, and B, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government to the culture report? Thank you. Assemblyman Bokhari was busy as chair. That brings us to today's main item. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guests who are here today, joining us to discuss arson offences in London. We have Charlie Pugsley. Welcome back, Charlie. Deputy Commissioner, Operational Director for Prevention, Protection and Policy, London Fire Brigade. Pamela Oparocha, Assistant Commissioner, Prevention and Protection, London Fire Brigade, and Stephen Mackenzie, Independent Fire, Security and Resilience Consultant. Thank you all so much for spending your mornings with us. Deputy Commissioner, can I begin with you? How does the LFB and the Met work together when there's been an arson in London?
Thank you, Chair. So there's a range of ways in which we work with the Met Police when there has been an arson. That can start when we attend a fire, and if our fire crews think it's suspicious, we're normally liaise with the police and there'll be a level of investigation there. The officers on our fire engines conduct what we call is a Tier 1, or a basic level of investigation into the cause of that fire. if they've got enough to think it is suspicious, so for example, sadly something many of us may be familiar with, a burnt-out motorcycle in the middle of a parkland is unlikely to be an accident. So they will then raise that with the police. It may be that the police can't always attend because, understandably, the police may have certain things that they have to deal with. You know, if there's a street robbery or something going on, that's clearly something that cannot wait for their urgent response. If for some reason the police can't attend, our crews or share the information with police colleagues thereafter. We have a higher level, which is when there's a more complex case or a larger case where our fire investigation team will attend, and these are full-time professional qualified fire investigators, and we will work closely with the police under the police's remit. That is to say that the police would have primacy for such an investigation, and we would work with them to a point that was mutually agreeable. For example, there are some cases where the police may get a forensic scientist in if the case justifies it, but normally we work closely with them to help determine the cause of that fire. There may also be cases where we may not attend and the police might be made aware of an incident, for example, a fire all out, and the police may ask us or our fire investigation team to assist them as well. So again, that's something that we would do. And just to give the committee a bit of a feel, for our primary fires, that's to say where in essence there's an insurable loss or a bigger fire, our fire investigation team roughly go to around 10% of incidents per year, proportionately. It's probably also worth noting, Chair, that we have 2 fire dogs, and while arson is not a fire brigade remit, it's, you know, criminal act. This is part of our collaboration piece, and as well as the great community work they do, they can really help in terms of one of the challenges in investigation is actually determining how big your scene is. And if I can use perhaps an example, if you think, say, an ignitable fluid such as petrol has been used, you don't just look at where it's been used. You might think, well, have they carried it away? Have they thrown a container over the fence or something? And that could be really crucial evidence. So having the benefit of our on-call fire dogs, with a handler, of course, can be really important, because when you think about the challenging on resources, it allows us to do a really wide sweep. And actually determine if there's any traces of petrol or other similar fluids, and that can really help in terms of condense the scene down and actually capture really important evidence that could be crucial in a conviction.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Stephen, similar. What does good collaborative working look like between the police and a fire and rescue service?
I think the best contemporary example is the Grenfell Tower investigation, where it was a massive persons recovery operation for those who survived and those, unfortunately, who were deceased. There was a great deal of sensitivity about the person recovery, the protection of forensic evidence, and a massive combined effort which drew upon the Metropolitan Police, London Fire Brigade, other experts, plus forensic scientists, specialists as well, to not only inform the Grenfell inquiry, but the wider criminal and civil investigations. And I believe from some of the feedback post-Grenfell inquiry that the Met Police investigation is now a global investigation following the wider building safety crisis. That takes a monumental degree of collaboration and cooperation between the services.
Thank you. I mean, just sort of perhaps more of a less serious incident. Just typically, how would you view that relationship working well?
Well, I generally work as a kind of independent consultant spanning across fire, security, counter-terrorism, resilience and disaster management. Everything from complex estates such as universities, hospitals, local authorities, government facilities and more sensitive facilities that I can't talk about today in an open public forum. What we see everything from collaboration on kind of work with youth groups, school groups, the police cadets, the fire cadets, right up to the major incident responses that we see in London, plus plus the anticipatory annual exercises, not only between police, fire, but the ambulance service, local authority liaison officers, and the wider civil contingencies framework. We are very, very practised in London, from the serious side down to community engagement, from home fire safety checks, fallen baby P, a lot of welfare surveillance of vulnerable persons, and a lot of tie-in to the NHS and mental health services as well, plus adult social services. So there's a wide, complicated network under Civil Contingencies Act through to local authority governance, where we're dependent on emergency services. They are essentially the first person on scene. And they have the mandates for community risk reduction programmes, prevention programmes, community engagement. And we've got some of the world-class leaders with us today in London, and we actually disclose our methodologies around the world.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'll start with Pamela, but this question is open to everyone, so we'll go. So there were 2,430 recorded incidents of arson in London in 2024, which was an increase from 1,894 in 2022. What do you think is driving that increase?
So can I just confirm that that's our data or police data? Because our data shows a fall in deliberate fires over that period of time. Yeah. So. Yeah.
It's police data.
Yeah. So can I get you, John?
Yeah, it's right if I come in on there. So, yeah, as Pam's noted, we've got approximately a 10% drop over a 2-year period. However, there are certain hotspots, for example, increase in fires in prisons, seasonal variations such as wildfires, open land, which is clearly an issue. While we've got a slightly different direction in terms of data for the police, I think it's really important to stress that that doesn't mean to say it's not a significant concern for us, because it's not lost on us that every arson can be exceptionally impactful. It's one of those life-changing events if it actually does affect your home, your property, your community. And this is part of the reason, and I think Stephen touched on part of it, why we try to have an end-to-end process led via borough risk management plans, youth work and others to try and address the impact of deliberate fire setting or arson.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add, Stephen?
Yeah, I think the first thing to notice is we're kind of reporting on the primary police criminal evidence data and also London Fire Brigade's data. But what we need to do is see a mechanism to harness that with all events, all near misses, because we don't always know the matrix between a small-scale, localised near miss event and something that's catastrophic. There is a need to actually harness and bring in some modifying data from the insurance sector, because they can gauge the commercial claims, so that we've got a more complete set, and then we can actually look at clusters, hotspots or outliers that might actually be important to us. And I think that was one of the surprising things in the study that was reported in the International Journal for Fire and Safety Journal, that some of the demographics has changed in terms of age profile from young males to more middle-aged males, predominantly males heavily driven through, but we don't see any kind of demographics, culture, heritage, religion, ethnicity, origin. There's whole data sets as an academic that I'm quite concerned is missing, and therefore we might be drawing assets to the wrong place.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, Charlie, do you want to
apologies if I can just come in on that, because while there's nothing there that I don't disagree with, I think because we are looking at a larger data set, I think we're also bearing in mind the political situation and community over the last couple of years. There's clearly going to be very localised situations where we do have to intervene and do more reassurance for specific communities, for example. And again, this is part of what we try to do with the links with our local borough commander and crime partnerships, safer neighbourhood partnerships, because while it may not affect the macro data as such, it's very real for those people in the communities. And again, this is why, while we have overarching arson prevention work, it's still got to be driven by our boroughs and our stations in terms of making a difference.
Thank you. Can I just then pick you up, Charlie, on why there's a difference between your data and the Met data then? Because surely arson is arson and therefore you should both have the same figure.
I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speak to the Met's data in fairness, but I think some examples could be, if it's, for example, on recorded and reported rates, for example, it could actually be taken as a positive because actually it's a bit like when we introduced fitness training, we actually had more people having, you know, fitness-related accidents because you're actually looking at it more actively. Now, I'm not saying that is the truth of it, but we record the most. So when our fire engines go out, we record it on the professional judgment of the fire officer based on their assumption at that time. With the police, it could be completely different metrics. So, for example, they might get somebody for a batch crime, for example. But I'm just very wary about overextending where I can't actually speak with knowledge in terms of the police data.
Yeah, that's fair enough as a response. Would you be able to write to us then with your data on arson broken down by borough so that we can compare it to the data that we've been able to get from the police?
Absolutely.
And then I think I'm going to close there, Chair.
Thank you. Stephen, could I ask if you've got any theories as to why the data might be a discrepancy?
From an academic context, having worked in a number of the UK and universities and also doing sabbaticals in the University of Maryland fire engineering programmes, I think what we've got is a particular way of capturing data that has been slowly but surely, and I'm going to be quite controversial here, eroded. We used to have very good data and very good data sets, but they're quite hard to drill into. A lot of the consequential or incidental losses from arson or fires has been lost. It's kind of been filtered through. Crews are increasingly very busy. There's a capacity and a resource issue as well. It's also who is the first on the shout and then determine what comes next, whether it's the police, the fire or responding paramedics even, or insurers. We need to have some sort of national mechanism again, either through the government-backed Arson Prevention Bureau to bring everything together again from central government, local government, the emergency services, the insurance sector and other stakeholder groups, and we might then be able to interrogate it a little bit more with a degree of certainty and then inform national programmes, regional variations and then local community needs where we've got hotspots. So I think in the modern digital age, we haven't moved with the times. We need to take a step back, pull the data in, maybe even commission a National Audit Office to do a national study again, and then really drill into it to drive out where's the root causes and the compounding issues.
Thank you. And sorry, it's my job to ask silly questions sometimes. But, why does the data matter? Like, once you've got those hotspots, what can you do with that data?
The data can give us an indication of where we've got dense clusters within particular areas. We can even do, pardon the term of phrase, a heat map. We can do a heat map nationally. We can do a heat map across the world, across Europe, nationally, regionally, and then focus into local authority boroughs, and then particular areas. We've already got indications why you've got quite a hotspot down in Greenwich. It's because of the number of prisons down there. You've also got quite a large displaced persons community. You've got quite a large hospital in the area. You've got quite a large mental health command need as well. And it's a major transport hub. So we could maybe look at it, look for not only the numbers but its statistical significance, and then help that drive through some of our risk-informed prevention work or protection work, make sure we get the right assets in the right place. I'm going to give you a little example. When we did a study for NHS Scotland, when we were reviewing the fire code, we actually found all the new hospitals were planned on the wrong side of the cities versus the customer needs. So what we actually did, we moved it round. We actually found that it was more costly to maintain the hospitals rather to build new. So what we did through sensible data analysis, we could drill into things. We also had part-time students who were actually serving fire officers go in and meticulously go through each and every one FDR1 fire incident report and map it against socio-economic groups. So higher socio-economic groups, candle fires, incense burners, crystals and the window reflecting sunlight, and electrical fires, whereas lower socio-economic groups, alcohol, tobacco, chip pan fires. What we find in some community groups is open flame cooking, because that is what their heritage has led them to, but then it creates other fire safety issues. So there's a big complicated things. We need to see a return to some public funded research. The government's the only organisation big enough, but we've seen the privatisation of the Fire Service College, the Police College, the Emergency Planning College, the Building Research Establishment. Where's the focal point?
Thank you. I've got one more question. I've got Assembly Member Hall and then Assembly Member Tyrrell. Do you want to go? Is it on this very specific subject?
It's on this.
Assembly Member Hall.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I find this fascinating because when I was leader of Harrow Council, we termed the heat maps. We used to layer upon layer upon layer of them in the borough, where the hotspots were for everything, and the fire brigade were included in that at that time, and it was amazing how everything were coming through into these hotspots. Do you know, Charlie, whether the councils are still doing that?
So there is a variation across different local authorities, but I know that every single borough commander will be looking at that data, picking up with local authority partnerships and crime partnerships, because exactly as you said, it is really, really important. Not only can it help with where your interventions are going and really understanding. So when we talk about deliberate fire setting or arson, for example, you might get 1 or 2 fires in open areas that you think, well, it could be smoking, it could be careless this or that, or something. But if you get 10 of them at a peak time, and maybe it's when school is emptying out or at certain other circumstances, that really gives you the key data, and then that will allow us to work with policing colleagues. And, you know, one example, Barnet, they go out and do park patrols in certain times because they know the data shows them that way. Some of our education inputs are targeted in a specific way with schools if we think there's a link. So while there is variation across London, it is an absolute fundamental part of each borough's work from a fire perspective, and in every borough we definitely do liaise with local authority and police.
Yeah, it's very good, because we used to layer the littering on top, which of course is something that would affect the fire brigade. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may jump in this one. Post-Grenfell response, I worked for a number of local authorities, and we were going in with an unknown kind of risk dynamic in the kind of days, weeks, months, years after Grenfell. What we had to do is look at our property portfolio, look at our service users, look at the hotspots. Emergency housing, I recommend now to every local authority, emergency housing, that's a receiving centre for people that might have substance abuse issues, might have domestic violence issues, might have mental health issues. You don't know who's coming through the door, so let's put fire suppression in those buildings to protect the building asset and the occupants, and also if you get any kind of squabbles, disputes between various groups. Then we start looking at elder care, so it wasn't just about the high-rise, it was about the emergency housing, it was about the assisted housing, it was about the extra care housing. And then out in the community, we joined the local safer neighbourhood teams, the local authority, police and community liaison groups. We'd have active standing meetings with our local fire service colleagues. We had very good ones down at Lambeth, very good ones at Southwark, Greenwich, Kingston, just to name a few. And then what we did was we'd get out for estate days and actually have people come and meet us and have the fire engines, and we'd do home safety checks, we'd install smoke detectors, and we'd also get a little bit of intelligence where somebody was maybe being targeted by an unsavoury group, and then we'd set up some surveillance and get on that with the police service. So there are some very complicated and sophisticated things, but I don't know how well it's shared out with individual local authorities.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Assembly Member Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. So this is to the fire brigade, and whichever one you want to take it, which is how often do you find those responsible for arsons, and which of those are, and how often, and how many of them are repeat offenders?
So I can give you some example of some high-profile investigations we've been involved in, but in terms of that would be a question better placed to our police colleagues, because we will feed in, we will provide witness statements, we'll provide evidence, but ultimately it's for the police to take through the process. And even when, for example, one of our fire dogs or fire investigators have been instrumental in getting that key evidence, we'll only go to the trial if it goes to trial for that specific part to give evidence, and then we step back. So, you know, sorry, my apologies, not trying to be evasive on the question, but again, it's just trying to make sure that I don't speak for the police in terms of that. But I also think there's two aspects to it, because your point about repeat offenders, I think there's a difference between, if I can describe it as a career criminal arsonist type thing, where you've got organised crime or something that's really serious, and there could also actually be patterns of behaviour that is repeated arson, and that's the kind of thing that our crews are more likely to be involved in, not necessarily in the, you know, the criminal justice side, but in terms of the interventions, because it's everything from, in Southwark, doing visual audits, which is where we go around, we try and spot rubbish, we flag it up with the local authority, because, you know, if it's just a phase, if you take away the fuel, there's nothing to set fire to. So, or, as I say, education in schools, because, you know, the huge majority of our communities are really good people, and it's just sometimes having people in there who can actually you know, explain the real consequence and the long-lasting impact.
Thank you for that. And then, are you notified when, or is the fire brigade notified when a convicted arsonist is being released from prison, so you're aware they're going back into their community?
That's a very difficult area, because you get into, you know, people's right to rehabilitation. There may be certain cases, if there's a risk, we may be informed about something in particular, but routinely we're not. I think with that comes a great deal of risk, but we do have, if there's any particular area of concerns, we have our team, our National Interagency Liaison Officers and our Operational Resilience and Control Department, who will liaise with the police or other appropriate security services to flag up any areas of concern.
Thank you. And Stephen, if I can come to you one more time. I think earlier on you said that the profile of the average arsonist, or the most common, I suppose, used to be a young man and now it's a middle-aged man. I mean, the obvious thing is that generation just growing up, or what's going on there?
Honest answer, don't know.
Okay.
Very good question, though. I think, yeah, it's a very interesting question. Do we need to look at the evolution of someone, especially those that we designate with a mental health condition? And I'm an NHS Credit Security Manager, and I had the London Ambulance Service security and counter-terrorism in South West London, plus about 25 hospitals across London. We find that partners do develop from juvenile curiosity, and London Fire Brigade has one of the best junior fire setting educational programmes in the country. We need to roll that out and have the same level of resource. Very good cadet group as well to tackle young fire setters. Then it can move through generational. And I've actually got some kind of hospital cases outside London. There was a gentleman in 2018, 66 previous convictions across 156 offences. And he's been given a life sentence, but he's only going to do 7 years. Right. So the question about, do we get informed? Not always. Sometimes we get to know. It also varies. It's not gender specific. About 70–80% are male, but we also have very dangerous females out there having supervised female forensic mental health units. There was a lady in 2016. She was a care home worker. She's been given 14 life sentences. She was that great a danger. And we're trying to encourage courts where somebody does have a mental health condition or a paramania that apply a whole life mental health order to them rather than a criminal order. And if we've looked at the Home Office early release programme, arson needs to be taken off the books. Okay, thank you.
And do you know what conversations, and you might not know this, but ministers are having around this? Like, is it a very live conversation, or is it just not really?
It would definitely be a live conversation between ministers, the appropriate select committees, the all parliamentary groups. And so David Aim, we must acknowledge that he was savagely attacked in his community office. He was actually then chair of the fire safety and rescue group for both houses at Parliament. So it's an active. We don't see it as a job. We see it more as a vocation or a life calling. We have our own personal networks, we have political networks, we've got journalistic networks, and then we've got our intelligence and sector expert. This will be looked at, but how in depth in the background of an ongoing building safety crisis, new fire safety legislation, new building safety legislation, a housing crisis, a homeless crisis, and the backdrop of very serious global instability. Ministers are getting pulled quite a lot. They're very, very busy, as with MPs and local authority councillors as well. What we need to do as a sector and community is come together and give them the answers. What is that mechanism now?
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. You've semi-answered a bit of this, but if we could just concentrate on London for you, Stephen, because obviously you guys are only going to concentrate on London. Is there any assessment of the nature of arson incidents in London, and is there something that's emerging as a greater threat that we see far more of in London? I mean, in years gone by, domestic violence was always associated with it, but I'm going back. I mean, what's emerging in particular, Charlie?
So, in terms of the big trends, and I think Stephen touched on it earlier, and we're happy to give you a bit more detail on our interventions, but is a rise in fire in prisons, which, again, is obviously very difficult because it's also a very difficult environment for us to support in because there are all kinds of other considerations. The other is the rise seasonally in potential deliberate fire setting or arson outside of in open land, which, as I said, does tend to be seasonal, and that varies between 30 to 60% of the total figures. And that creates a whole range of problems, particularly for the investigation and actually bringing people to justice for such acts. I mean, I'm actually National Fire Chiefs Council lead for fire investigation, and we've been speaking with partners such as the Forestry Commission and other interested stakeholders to see what we can do. But in essence, as you'll be well aware, you've got sort of fire scenes that can be multiple acres, and because of how fires burn, it's not always in the same space. And then, of course, you've got challenges such as proving it wasn't refracted sunlight barbecue. But So I guess in terms of the bigger trends are easy to pick out, but sometimes, as I touched on earlier, it's the smaller ones where we can maybe be more effective if we're seeing a spate in a community or in a certain circumstance, because there might not be the biggest number, but as I say, if you've got a park, and I'm sure all Assembly members have got some experience, and you're finding that motorcycles are being dumped and burnt out, or you know, similar things like that, really impacts when you think about how, you know, children and communities use that space regularly. And that's something where you can effectively target it through high visibility, so that could be fire engines just making sure they're visible presence, police doing more patrols around there where possible. Yeah,
okay. Two things. Can you tell me more about what's happening in prisons, because that doesn't often get spoken about, so this is quite different. And secondly, I know people start fires on balconies and stuff like that, to have open barbecues on a balcony. Have you discussed this with housing associations to ban all these things in their tenancy agreements? Because I know a colleague of mine many years ago in Barnet was inspecting a council property at one point, only to find that a fire had been made in the middle of the room using all the skirting boards to keep a fire going for cooking. That was a good few years ago, but I mean, so there's two aspects there. First of all, I'm interested in the prisons, but then if you could...
If I can go in reverse order, and I'll hand over to Pam to cover the prison situation. In terms of... it should be within the risk assessment of a building about safe use of balconies, so that shouldn't really be something that we have to push on too hard ourselves, because the people responsible for the block should already be aware of that. And particularly depending on the nature of the building, year on year we regularly give advice, and I think it was about last year, apologies, it can be a blur in this role, but we specifically targeted fires on balconies, and not only in terms of people's behaviours and what they're doing there, so telling the people who live there, telling the responsible people, but working with online marketplaces that are actually selling these things that were actually designed to hook over the railings of a balcony. Now, for us, that is...
crazy.
Yes, it's not desirable behaviour. So we've been very proactive, but even just things like not just reacting to the problem, but trying to get to the underlying cause, like with, say, marketplaces actually taking these things off sale. The other example about people maybe making parts of flammable material or building fires out of the skirting boards, that's a bit more tricky, because then we're into the territory of arguably more mental health interventions and actually putting people at risk. So that's something where we would expect the police to be involved, or other support services, because somebody who's doing that clearly needs support of one kind or the other. If that's sufficient, I'll pass across to Pam.
Yeah, to prisons. Lovely. Thank you, Pamela.
The data that I want to talk to you about is data over the last 2 years. So 13% of primary fires over the last 2 years have been in prisons. I'll give you a little bit more data. Stephen talked earlier about Greenwich Borough having 3 prisons, so 3 prisons in the borough, plus including a young offenders unit. So there's an expectation that there's going to be, because of that environment, that we're going to be dealing with more fires in those environments. I'll talk to you a little bit more. Sorry.
Do the prisons have their own firefighting people, or do they rely on the local?
They have an initial response in prisons, but we get called to prisons and go through security. But there is an expectation that we will always respond to fires in prisons, although they do have their own fire crews there, trained officers there, working in prisons. I'll just talk to you a little bit about. Sorry, I've got a bit more data that I just wanted to share with you about prisons. In between 2023 and 2025, in terms of geographical hotspots, prisons accounted for 9 out of the 10 of the top 10 areas where we had a high number of deliberate fires.
How do the prisoners get access to matches or I mean, is it literally what comes in on drones with the drugs? Is it? I mean, we've seen a dreadful incident recently with hot oil. I mean, but you can work out how they might be able to do it. But how on earth would you set fire to something unless you've got matches or a lighter?
I can't really speak to that.
Having supervised fire and security for NHS staff in prisons and forensic health units, the service users, the prisoners and those being detained will think 24/7 about how they can bring stuff in, how they can get stuff in, and how they can use that for maximum disruption. There is technologies out there such as fire suppression or water mist systems that we can use to combat the risk. The worst one we've seen was a gentleman smuggled in a lighter. He was declothed, he had a Kevlar blanket, but managed to create a fire and take out the secure forensic mental health unit wing for a couple of months. So if they can do that, then we've got very serious things. Screening, room searches, balancing human rights, rights to dignity, are always very complicated in these environments. But what we try and do is create a fire-resistant box, and then we can put automatic fire safety systems or systems on a double knock. Get a fire alarm, get a device, and you can even have a bang-off button to just put water mist, that's damp air, into that room, knock the fire down and contain it. And we see this all the time. So it's our legacy prisons and secure mental health units through to a reluctance to put in wet suppression systems in case they're damaged or tampered with. But we need to have a little bit of a rethink on it because the cost can be quite significant due to downtime, disruption, which is often intentional, and draw on the local fire services for responses. I'd like to see the data from Greenwich as to not only the fire instance, but how many responses is the local authority, the local fire service having to do to this cluster.
I tell you why I find this perplexing, because I've been on the London, either this committee or its predecessor, I think since 2010, and prisons have never come up particularly as an issue. And if you read the newspapers, I don't know if I've missed it, but anything to do with fire, because of my connection for so many years, I always, you know, it reminds me, and I don't know if Anne's the same, but I just find it weird that it's not discussed more, or that it's not flagged up as such a major issue, which clearly it is. Charlie?
Yeah, just from more of an opinion rather than backed by hard data, I would entirely agree considering the numbers, but, you know, sadly people who are in prison are still somebody's family and, you know, parts of the community that have to be protected. So, you know, as in, we certainly are never going to be shy of that duty of care, but what you tend to have is smaller contained fires, because in terms of the fire setting, as opposed to just much larger antisocial behaviour, most of the responses we go to are in individual cells. And coming back to your point and Stephen's point, the level of ingenuity, I think, being incarcerated for long periods of time, you know, because from a fire investigation point of view, we've seen people take batteries and, you know, use them to create electrical resistance that can then set something on fire. So it's always going to be a super challenge. And I think also coming back to Stephen's point, while obviously we're always advocating suppression, you've also then got to think about the cost and impact, because if somebody has a bad day, and I think, you know, it's quite well reported about the overpopulation and levels of mental health challenges in prisons, it's I just think it's a very difficult situation, but we will continue to work with and just try and protect people as best we can. But as colleagues have said, we've got to do that in a slightly more measured and careful way, because there is a different level of risk there.
And of course there's risk to firefighters if they go in, if it's a very secure unit and
there is,
dangerous
but
people.
If we get a call to a prison, we'll automatically flag up for one of our national interagency liaison officers, whose role it is to actually work with the prison team as well. Conversely, on the other side of the incident, our fire investigators will sometimes work with the authorities, because sometimes, sadly, you need, if you like, the conviction to actually get the support in place or get the person to the right place. But in other times, it's just fairly obvious in terms of somebody has used item X to set light to some form of combustible, and it's just something that is sadly part of prison life, it appears.
OK, so what does the union say? Because if our firefighters are sent into a maximum security place, we've seen what's happened recently with hot oil and other such things quite recently. Do the union flag up that they're concerned for the safety of firefighters? So we have a legal duty, as you know, for the health and safety of our staff, and this is part of the reason why we put additional controls in place. We're not going to rush in just into a prison cell without absolutely the right protections in place. Normally that will be, as Pam mentioned, you get the prison staff who've got the training for initial response, and that's also part of the reason we have one of these national interagency liaison officers who's normally a senior officer with additional training in multi-agency working, just to make sure that we have those safe systems of work in place, because it's not just the risk, it's making them part of the problem.
for example, if they become trapped somewhere. So I'm not aware of any issues we've had with the union, but I would like to think that is because we fully recognise not only the risks and hazards in a prison, but also that we're not the experts in the prison as well. Yeah. So that's why we'd be looking for the relevant experts on site to guide us through safely. So we might go, for example, to a staging area, and then as an area is cleared by prison staff, we can then go forward, depending.
All the while the fire is burning, because what you do is so time critical. It's a fascinating one, and I hate to say it's something I wasn't aware was such an issue. But thank you.
Thank you. To go from prisons to open land, which you kind of implicitly talked about earlier, whenever there's a wildfire, there's always that conversation about whether it's been the extreme weather or whether it's been an arson. How are you tackling wildfires in light of arson attacks?
So, as you'll be aware from previous committees, we've got a range of interventions and advice, and this year as well we've given additional advice on protecting your home and things like managing the perimeter of your home or your business to something that, in fairness, is much better understood and embedded in places like California. So it's about managing that risk. One of the great challenges we've got, as much as we say don't have barbecues, don't smoke, don't litter, all the things that could, not good for communities, it still happens. So when we do get those situations, obviously we would seek to respond in an appropriate way. If we see a pattern of that, and I mentioned Barnet earlier as just one example of where that localised working, compared to if we went back 5 years or so when maybe we'd have just had a brigade-wide policy on what we do. It's about empowering local stations to look at that data, as Assembly Member Hall was saying about, just so we can do some specific interventions there. The bit that is really challenging is in the investigation piece. Because it is rarely that, that sort of joyous moment where you've got the CCTV, for example, and it shows somebody doing something because by nature of where the incidents are occurring. But just because it's difficult, we do try and investigate fires. The wildfires of 2022, obviously very high profile. We spent a significant amount of time trying to ascertain the cause, working very closely with the police. But even using technology such as drone footage, it's just probably one of the most challenging places, because part of the reason that arson's used by criminals is because it destroys evidence. So you're then inherently working with something that is destroying the evidence. And when you've got, unlike a home or a business, you've got no boundaries necessarily, that makes it even more challenging. But we continue to do what we can.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Now, this is Stephen. I find this so interesting. In an article in December 24, you said, and I quote, "In today's unstable geopolitical climate, I've become increasingly concerned about the rise of arson as a tool for sabotage and terror. And the recent incidents highlight a need for updated security measures that account for unconventional methods of attack." And I've read all your comments about Russia, etc. So what specific actions do you think are needed?
I think we started taking a serious look at fires that lead to explosion or explosions that lead to fires, particularly after 9/11, London bombings and other major incidents around the world. Arson is an accessible modus operandi, especially in countries where it's so hard to get firearms or explosives, such as the UK. It's the next default. And if you remember back to the Northern Ireland troubles, petrol bombs, Molotov cocktails, frequently deployed. And we've just seen a horrific incident over the weekend in America. We're always vigilant. But what we have seen is an uptake which has led to the National Counter-Terrorism Office. Forgive me, I can't remember the rebanded title. National Protection Agency, I think it is. They produced guidance on weaponising fire in 2017. It was updated in 2024. But in between time with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw the Ukrainians successfully deploy arson and incendiary devices, both defensively and offensively. and Russia's took an absolute battering. But we've had bleed out from that conflict in Europe, in the UK, where Ukrainian-affiliated businesses have been targeted by Russian state actors or proxies. It's in the press just now that the current Prime Minister's previous residents have been targeted. We are all on high alert, whether it's in the public sector, complex public building environments, a more sensitive critical national infrastructure, and then target-hardened assets that I don't want to touch on because it gets a little bit close to current assignments. What we need to do is encourage everybody to start to look at the threats, because most businesses that suffer a major fire don't survive. 60% of construction fires happen when the building's 90% complete. We don't know the instance of arson. We can't track the lone actors, the determined mischievous, malicious, activist, militant, anarchist, terrorist, state proxy, state actor. We've only got so much intelligence capacity and apparatus in the UK, and the load following Daesh and ISIS is phenomenal on the security services. Now we've got war in Europe. Now we've got Russian proxies operating in the UK. The biggest case was the Novichok attack, but we have seen it sweep across Europe from state actors from Russia setting fire to civilian shopping malls, doing online searches where it's GRU or SFB, the intelligence services for Russia, looking at Google planning permissions, building control applications for fire and life safety system vulnerabilities. That's the most concerning thing I've seen in 3 decades of being in this sector. So we need to start looking beyond those facilities, military, nuclear, defence, aerospace, government, that are all target hardened. Start looking at the soft environments, hospitals, public buildings, arenas. We've seen Martin's Law come in recently. It's a very complicated environment. It's going to take the entire fire profession, the entire security profession, the entire emergency services, and ordinary civilians to call it out. If you see something suspicious, dial that counter-terrorism hotline. They will run that investigation down until it's exhausted and try and decombust your area and secure your areas and businesses. Who's looking at your buildings? Who's doing hostile reconnaissance? What's your affiliations? What's your vulnerabilities? I would like to start seeing a move towards risk assessments, not just focusing on life safety, but property protection, environmental protection and resilience, especially in the public domain, and then into the private sector, and to join forces with insurers. But for now, we're watching, and we're watching very closely, and we're trying to stay one step ahead of the threats that are coming across the borders. And it's a very serious one. Certain countries are being slammed round the world. It doesn't even need a state actor. Social unrest could be a mechanism. If we've seen what's happened in France of late, following football matches, arson is the straight go-to for social unrest. We're very sophisticated in London with our counter-terrorism response because of the Northern Ireland troubles, and we need to revive that. The Cold War has not gone away. It's just evolved to become more dangerous. And now we're seeing drones, independent vehicles, an evolution of incendiary devices, which is terrifying, and a lot of technology coming out of the Ukraine conflict that we should all be kind of looking at and aware of. I'm going to leave it there. I think you maybe want to reach out to the intelligence services and take a separate report.
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding this both terrifying and very, very interesting because it's emerging. I mean, you've slightly touched on it, but I've written it down. Are insurance companies prepared to help fund looking at the most risk places in London? Because, I mean, if you're saying that buildings are 3/4 done or 90% done, they must be insured, I would assume. So it would be in the interests of these big insurance companies to put some money aside for research on this, would it? And do they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think just take a step back, the likes of government facilities, military facilities and licensed facilities, actually nuclear licence, biohazard licence, they're all target hardened. We specifically look at safety cases for internal and external threats. We look at it, we do formal arson assessments. When we move down to the next level of kind of local government and critical and national infrastructure, again, we're doing all those threat assessments. I've been in charge of fire safety at St Pancras Station, other major developments and facilities up to including the London Olympics. We harden those facilities so it's where the soft underbelly is, where the risk is. And how can we, insurers are very good at managing risk and actually divulging guidance, and if you don't get it right, you either remove a premium or your premium is going to go up. A lot of people don't realise you can tack into the very good insurers like Marsh, Zurich, Avis, Aon, and they actually have technical support teams for businesses that can actually come out. You can also apply to, if you're a local business, apply to your Secure by Design team. With the local Metropolitan Police, or if you've got a vulnerable persons group, reach out to the London Fire Brigade for a home fire safety visit or a building business fire safety advisory. There's lots of advice out of there, but not all of it's good, and it's trying to focus in on the bit that you need. I think we need to return to some very focused either task and finish groups under central government or publicly funded studies, or just to bring together under a ministerial portfolio, as we did Port Grenfell, to look at specific risks to society.
Well, and we can see by what happened at Heathrow, the whole place comes to a grinding halt when there's a fire in one of the outstations. So are the authorities looking at this in a more serious way now? Because it's never seemed to have raised its head quite like it is at the moment.
I think there's a lot of rumour mill about Heathrow, and I actually commented on it. With the situation they faced, they made the call that they had to make to get the planes on the ground and get everybody down safe. That's a win for us in the emergency plan and resilience communities. There should have been better protections that it didn't occur. There needs to be an independent inquiry into that now, so we'll leave that one there. There is requirements under the Civil Contingencies Act to actually assess and build in your resilience. We did work through, when my time with the Emergency Plan Society was Vice Chair in London, with the Cabinet Office, and we actually worked with the British Standards Institute for a city resilience standard. So we've now got a British standard badged city resilience to help us move forward. The Civil Contingencies Act, out of date, out of practice, and needs desperate overhaul. We actually need to start thinking about, following the Strategic Defence Review yesterday, moving the country into a global instability flex position into a pre-war footing. If we get more bleed out from the Russian-Ukraine conflict. There's also been an edict laid down by Iran, Ayatollah, targeting the West, specifically the UK, America and such like. And we have also got other actors around the world that mean us injustice and harm. So we need to look at our legislation, look at our guidance, look at our delivery, look at our threat assessments, and then drive out the most appropriate risk mitigation strategies.
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister did say he was putting us on a war footing. I mean, if I ask you, Charlie, I mean, some of this will come under you guys in London to look at strategic places that, you know, could cause massive problems if they're taken out like Heathrow. Have you got the resource to start looking into this? Have you been asked to start looking at the most at-risk sites for arson in London?
Well, excuse me if I don't go into the detail in an open committee,
no, just generally.
We have for some years been very, very active in looking at fire as a weapon and how we work with stakeholders, and that can be everything from working with police and specialist partner agencies in that space, again, which we are very active in. It can be looking at individuals who, it's not the building, it's the individual that's potentially a target. So what's the role for the fire service? It could be looking at things like Christmas markets that we do. You know, how can we make sure we're giving the right advice and support, because you've got a large group of people in a place that could potentially be a target. Pam's team, specialist fire safety advice. We have fire engineers and fire experts who, again, will just link in very carefully. So I'm happy to pick up outside of here for a bit more detail, but I will give you reassurance that we can't be complacent, because, you know, it's the old thing about somebody only needs to be successful once. So we're definitely not complacent. But what I can assure the committee is we are very, very focused on it, not just now, but have been for quite a few years now, because fire as well in particular, that's something that you don't need a lot of technical expertise to weaponise. So,
and you've got enough resource to be on top of this?
Yeah, I mean, London is, you know, a brilliant city, but there is such diversity that, you know, with what we've got at the moment, we think we're doing the right thing at the right level, but I think it's just about maintaining that support going forward.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Assemblymember Buckhari.
Thank you. Another fascinating fire committee meeting. It's always, we always delve into these topics, and I'm really glad that we're doing this. I'm going to be talking about prevention. So Pamela, as the Assistant Commissioner for Prevention and Protection, I hope that you can help me out with some of these questions. So the first one is about the fact that in Northamptonshire there's an arson task force. There's an arson reduction team in Greater Manchester. There's a North Wales arson reduction team. Can you tell me what's happening within the LFB, if there's a similar Pacific team focused just on arson? And if you don't mind, if you can, and you can bring it closer to yourself, you know, so that I can hear you. And yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Is that good? So I think our focus in London is mostly on education. It's not about we don't want to, because our data shows that a quarter of fires are deliberate fires involve younger people, 17 and under. So a lot of the work we do is with prevention in that area. So we have a fire setters intervention scheme, and that was established in 2001, and we've probably had around 4,000 referrals since then. And around so we work in combination with that team and with our fire stations. Our fire stations, about 41% of the referrals into that scheme come from our fire crews. So while they're out doing the work that they'd normally be doing in the community, where, especially during home fire safety visits, where they would have established through training, where they would have established there's instances where somebody's either fascinated by fire, talking a lot about fire, or has previously been involved in fire setting, they will refer them to the team, to the fire setters intervention scheme, and they do. Our team, I think there's five people in the team with managers and admin staff who do one-to-one training and one-to-one work with the individuals. And what we found with our data is that over 90% will not be involved in deliberate fire setting again once they've been through this process. Previously, this programme was sort of an 8-month programme, but with the work that we're doing now, we've reduced that to 5 months of intensive work where we see the young people regularly, and then after that, after a 6-month period, we go back again, and then 2 years communicate with them again. But like I said, for us it's about education and looking at that particular group of people, because like I said, sort of 1 in 4 deliberate fires involve people who are.
And that statistic 17. Is still the same. Like 1 in 4 children are still
that's
involved.
Our most recent data over the last 2 years. Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting because the team was talking about that change of demographic going to older men, but there is still a problem in terms of young children being fascinated by fire.
Yeah, very definitely.
I mean, Charlie,
If I can just add to that, so quite a few years ago we used to have an arson team, if you like, a small central team, but as has been spoken to many times in committee, with round about a quarter of all the national calls, 9 million people, 300 languages, etc., it wasn't necessarily working in the right way when we've actually got 408 land-based watches who should be in their community using the toolkits and support we provide them to actually make those meaningful interventions. So while things like education and our fire setters team done great work that Pam's just alluded to, it's things like over the last 2 years we've either supplied or installed 270 arson reduction letterboxes where people in our communities at a risk of arson, we can materially provide something that help them manage the risk, as well as some of the other interventions I've spoken about. So it's not saying that nationally other services aren't doing really great work, but you've got a range of different models. You know, some fire services have got 2 whole-time stations. We, as you know, have got 102 plus the river. Yeah. So for us, it's just about leveraging fire stations and actually, you know, continuously that drive of putting them at the heart of the community, looking at the data, giving them the tools. And again, we can't be complacent. We have to keep trying to do more. Finding new ways of communicating and providing advice, as again we spoke to previously, but that's probably the most important message for us, is that it's that ongoing bit with the people who are in the communities day in, day out.
So what you're saying is, going forward, you probably won't be having a Pacific task force on arson because of the work that you're doing on education and the community engagement work that you're doing.
Yeah, but because the other bit is, if we know that the tools that we can use, in essence, and we have to choose where to put our resources, because we don't have an infinite budget. But we know the fact that if I think about Havering versus Tower Hamlets, quite different compared to Bromley, compared to... So it really is about helping, supporting people to look at that borough. You know, each borough could almost be a region in itself sometimes. City of London, a very different pattern of crime compared to other places. So we just feel the most effective way is to... we have to have the tools, the advice, the online support, the you know, what works best in a crime partnership or in a safer neighbourhood team environment, but actually empowering our borough commanders and station teams to make that difference.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. On that, the group that you were just referring to in the intervention scheme, and you were talking about how the impact that you have on children and the differences that you make, but you also focus on children with ADHD and autism. Can you tell me why you do that within the scheme?
I think in London Fire Brigade, you want to focus on the most vulnerable in the community, and so we have specialist trained people who are trained to work with young people who are neurodiverse from all different backgrounds. And we also work with the families, with parents, with schools to identify the traits that you'd see in younger children. But it's important too. They are a group that's often disenfranchised in society, and so we will always focus on the most vulnerable in our communities.
And what about working with other groups? So, for example, CAMS, the Child and Adolescents Mental Health Services, because we talked about mental health being a real aspect here. Do you work with CAMS as well? Because they would have specific information about children with mental health issues.
Yeah, we do. We refer, once we've started working with young children, if it's sort of beyond our scope of expertise, we will refer them to CAMS. Yeah.
Brilliant. So what in terms do you do in your work about talking to children and young people about the impacts of social media? You know, we know that this is an issue when it comes to mental health for children specifically, but is there any evidence or any work that you've been doing that is linked to social media and arson incidents that are perpetuated by young people specifically?
I don't know that I can talk specifically to that, but we do have a schools team who work with... They have 3 different levels, and the work that they do, they modify their work so they're dealing with different age groups and time. And I mean, I can provide you with further information, but social media we are very aware of the impact of social media on young people and on the people working within the fire brigade. So I can probably get that information from you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's that curiosity angle, isn't it, of you know, wanting to know. I mean, back in the day, 30 years ago when I started teaching, kids had access to matches because their parents were smoking, and they would just, you know, they would bring them into school and light at them in the bins. You know, that was an issue for us back in the day. It's less so now, though, isn't it, in terms of how they're setting things alight? And I was wondering whether social media was an issue. So
Pam's happy to write with further details, but sadly, because of my age, I can remember back. Thank you. I can remember back to, as social media is becoming more prevalent, we have made direct interventions with things like online video platforms, if I'm using the right language there, shouldn't name anyone, having things that of concern to us that we then raise and we share through our channels and education partners. It's even things like well-meaning, the children make a Christmas candle with loads of combustible stuff around it, which nearly gave me a heart attack, which, you know, again, we'll then, very well-intentioned, a lovely thought, but we don't want to be going to a blaze. So we will try and pick up on those. And one of the things that we have been doing historically as well is part of a Safety First partnership where we work with the police and LAS. And I think that the whole social media is something that we are trying to come to terms with. But it's much broader than that because it speaks to safeguarding. You know, people get their truth off social media rather than necessarily fact-checking. So while we're happy to provide further detail, I think we are minded of the challenge, but we have done some direct intervention where we've discovered things.
I'm also interested in that kind of there's a difference, isn't there, between a child who's curious and a criminal intent as well. And I think we need to be really clear on this, that the work that you're doing is to prevent any future criminal intent, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the bit of, as I say, you know, by far the huge majority of people, good people, but just sometimes go down a pathway. So the sooner we can give that advice, show the human impact, and even things like some of just thinking, touching on your point about the modern world, it's like when we've previously done campaigns around fake charges, for example, it's about actually for the younger people, we found it more effective to talk about sometimes how it will break your device. Because, like, it could catch fire. Well, you know, perhaps a lower level of engagement. Well, it'll actually blow up your device and it'll stop it working. So it's just it's a bit like a lot of our community work. We've got to recognise that the people who are the experts are those people. You know, yes, we are fire experts, but we also need to be listening and then trying to tailor our inputs accordingly based on their lived experience and how society is. So a lot of challenge for us.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yes.
Sorry to jump in. I think one of the things I brought with us today is this little DVD-ROM. It's called Chemistry of Fire. It was done in partnership with the American Society of Fire Protection Engineers and Discovery Channels. And one of these CD-ROMs went out to every chemistry teacher in the country, from junior to high school, to harness that curiosity about fire and do it in a safe environment. You ask any American kid who Smokey the Bear is, they automatically know. So we've actually taught generations from these positive PR campaigns and children and youth engagement and parent engagement. The children police up the parents with discarded barbecues, smoking materials, glass when they're out in the wild. So I think we need to have a return to that. And if anybody remembers on our terrestrial TV, the Fire Kills, Get Out, Stay Out campaigns, we've kind of lost some of that with devolved regional powers and regional governments, not having centralised hubs like the BRE Fire Research Lab. They chop and change within ministries, and it's happening again now. We need to pull something back. We need to have some sort of stability, whether it's at local authority level, within a civil service, or a professional sector group, which brings across the UK Fire Services, the National Fire Chief Council, the insurance sector, and the fire profession sector, bring us all together then with communities to dial down destructive or malicious or mischievous fire setting, which may grow into arson or criminal acts, with something to harness the curiosity.
Have a look at that, yeah.
But we've lost most of our fire engineering programmes in the UK. We've even lost the one in London from Glasgow Caledonian, where I graduated from. It's now closed. They can't get the numbers. So we've got a build safety crisis response, but we've lost some of the key universities and colleges to deliver programmes. That's your next generation of fire professionals.
Yeah.
LFB's done a wonderful job. It's built up its engineering team, the fire cadets. I cannot highly commend the London Fire Cadets and the National Cadet groups, not just in fire, but police, and then all the youth groups. But there's a huge demand versus the number of available volunteer leaders and funding to support. So you've got disenfranchised youth who then turn to other activities. Touching on social media, I'm not going to name the publication, but there are some atrocious publications and materials out there that the security services take a great deal of interest off. But every time we try and get one down, another one pops up. And how do we get ahead of that? Is by educating the kids. What is right, what is wrong, not to go down that path. There's a lot of glamorisation of criminal activity and terrorist activity now. And we need to wind that back. And I don't know how we do that. That's going to take public servants like yourself to guide us as professionals. Thank you.
Well, there's a few recommendations, I think, within that segment, and thank you very much. I'm just going to finish off on community engagement, but specifically on the diverse communities that you've already discussed about in London. One of the visits that I did in Tooting, actually, the fires that they were actually, while I was there, they were dealing with a series of fires at the same time. And it was quite worrying because it was it's linked to arson, but it's also linked to mental health. And it was fires that people were setting alight because they actually wanted to hurt themselves, setting themselves alight and their house and their home. And I thought that was absolutely tragic and awful. And firstly, having the firefighters deal with that awful situation, but how are you dealing with it in terms of preventing it and having some sort of community work to prevent those types of fires? This is arson, but also mental health, and also another issue within our communities that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, as you know, this is one of the most tragic incidents we come to as a fire service, and particularly when you think of the first responders, ourselves, police, ambulance colleagues, it can be a truly terrible where people involve themselves in fires. In terms of the numbers are relatively small, but the impact is very high, particularly in a community. But I think then it's almost like after the incident is where the real work starts. And sadly, I can't tell you that there's an exact model to address this, because, it could be everything to do with threats to the individual, culture, just poor information, mental health. There are lots of different things. But the reason we have our fatal fire reviews after each incident, because it's about bringing everyone from the time the call comes into our control operator. And again, I think I feel for our control operators who sometimes have to deal with these calls. Having a situation described, getting the resources out there is really quite harrowing, through to our response, and then what we do in terms of the engagement. So it could be things like mental health engagement, or it could be something to do with a community group where it's absolutely the duty of the borough commander and the local leads and the watches to actually be involved in the detail. Sadly, with the years of my experience in fire investigation, we cannot stop making the effort, but sadly we can't always reach those people, if that makes sense, because the circumstances can be quite varied, and we're back to that point that fire is so accessible when you think about others. I
mean, they were saying it was cooking oils and things like that people were using. It's horrific. It's things that are so accessible in the house that it's difficult to prevent those types of fires.
Yeah, we do get a couple where occasionally people's clothing's caught fire, but then that can be for accidental purposes. But sometimes, yes, there's a range of different things, and sadly, we also attend incidents in open land as well, where it's very, very challenging. But it's just to say, ongoing work and the really quite solid work our teams do in the boroughs. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's tailor it to the event, and the only way you do that is by doing that detailed review and actually seeing where you can best make those connections with the partner agencies.
So what you're saying, it's a local approach. So I was in Tooting at the time. This is an issue that they were bringing up. They were saying it was happening a lot within their area, but it's not necessarily happening in other parts of London. No. So you are very focused on on making sure you've got the right resources, the right support, the right mental health support as well for those firefighters having to deal with it within those local areas?
Absolutely. So in terms of our firefighters, that's really key part of our work in terms of that initial trauma support. We have triggers that come up for certain kinds of incidents where we will then make sure we have an intervention with our fire crews, particularly those who first are exposed to it, because you might feel okay, but then it can be cumulative, it can be delayed and everything else. So yes, one of the areas I'm responsible is health, safety and well-being, and it's like we've got a range of third sector offerings in terms of well-being support, because same situation, it's not a one-size-fits-all in terms of counselling and trauma or early intervention by one of our trained mental health first aiders, for example. There could be different situations, but in terms of our outward-facing bit, it's in Tooting versus if it could be, I don't know, sort of somewhere the other side, Northolt. There's still going to be certain commonalities with certain kinds of incidents, and that's about making sure through our borough commander forums and everything else, we have the toolkit, if that makes sense, that we can share across. But ultimately, it's about trying to leverage local partnerships, but also recognising that mental health and support services are very challenged across London. But the good thing is by having those formalised partnerships in the boroughs, at least you do have that line of contact and you can try and make that difference. Those local
partnerships will include places of faith and worship as well, because I'm sure that they would have members of the community that have been impacted by these particular types of fires.
Absolutely, and you've heard the Commissioner and Jonathan Smith many times say about the importance of being in those communities. As you know, it's not like hard-to-access communities that's a language that's been used historically, because there's no walls there. It's about us making sure we're front and centre in terms of being within our communities and then providing that support through positive engagement.
Good, great, thank you.
Stephen, I think you wanted to come in.
Just a quick one. When we're working in local authorities or in hospitals, we do reach out to multi-faith groups, because there might be particular religious faiths that use lighted material, incense, candles, etc. for the celebrations, and we'll try and do a targeted kind of advice and prevention campaign, right through to mental health case management conferences, where we're actually there with the police, the fire service, especially if we've had an arson incident or a fire setting or a self-harming incident, with the mental health team and the caring community team. But we do have a little bit of a revolving door with mental health across the UK with the move towards care in the community. So what happens is somebody commits an event, then gets sectioned, then is treated, then we have the case management conference, they come out back into general housing pop. We've got population, we've got everybody concerned because they've started 1, 2, 3, 4 fires, but the mental health team's bound by saying they're now treated, they are on their meds. And when we try and ask, what's the prospect of the coming off the medication, they say we can't report that. And I've actually been quite pointed with senior psychiatrists and say, I need this report. And what we've had to do is move the individual into assisted care housing to get them the right level of service. We actually trialled at Lambeth, we started installing water mist systems in our high-rise blocks and our elder care blocks, and then where we had someone that we couldn't quite prove it, but with a suspicion, we could put plug-and-play water mist systems. It looks like a radiator, so it plugs in, we change the socket, it's hardwired in, it's got an anti-tamper device, it's got remote monitoring, we fill it with water, and if the person does create a fire in their flat, this thing will discharge and knock it down and notify the fire service. So we started trialling that, but the companies stopped producing them because they couldn't get market demand. And it was one of the greatest shames of modern society post-Grenfell was we couldn't get that technology out. But we have seen changes in buildings. Safety legislation makes our residential buildings, where we lose most people, safer. Self-immolation is quite a limited incident, but we have seen some little trends, and we do definitely worry about when we see it on the social media, we get copycats. As well. So all these things are very, very complicated. The fire services with their resources do an amazing job, but it's how can we do the next knockdown off the next risk level. And as I said to the Building and Fire Safety Minister, Lord Green, how fire deaths are falling until the next big event. And we had Grenfell, and there's maybe another one out there. It happens every 5 to 10 years. Yes, we are cleaning down risks like combustible balconies, putting fire suppression in, mandating hardwired fire alarm systems, but where's the next level of risk? Lithium-ion batteries and such like. We're constantly evolving. We're trying to stay one head of the game, but we need research funding, the educational basis, the government support, the local, to actually make the next generational step forward. And think about how much safer we are just with smoke detectors. What's the next step? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still intrigued about who Mr. Smokey the Bear is, but I'll have to watch the video sometime. Charlie, I don't know if this is too niche, but just to pick up on that, has there been any conversations around public procurement or about the fire brigade, either with the mayor or with the government, making sure that these machines are available? I don't even know if they're called machines, devices.
Not specifically as far as I'm aware. But there is a much wider conversation around fire suppression, and we continuously talk about the affordability and the cost per unit, and also the benefits of retrofitting. And one of the points that I think it may have been a couple of committees ago, I remember the Commissioner talking to the point of when we're looking about making buildings safer, if the level of risk is not particularly high in terms of maybe a small amount of cladding, how, for example, fitting suppression may really help manage that risk, and particularly with people's vulnerabilities, because fires in homes start in one room generally. So while there's not a specific procurement piece, because ultimately that I'm aware of that is because somebody has to pay for it and you have to have a market, there is a much wider conversation that we continue to input on fire suppression as a wider topic, and the benefit, you know, both to life safety but actually the cost benefit. When you think about the economic cost of fire, I think older figures were, you know, in sort of £70,000 upwards, and the cost of a life that you could prevent the death, I think the Treasury puts it around about £2 million. So it's just trying to, first and foremost, come from it's the right thing to do. But we also have to try and point out the business benefit, because there's also some myths that people have in terms of if I put water suppression in, it's going to flood my building. And we know that the data just really does not support that. You know, it doesn't mean to say it never happens, but generally speaking, the incidence of failures are extremely low. And it's other related technologies. So if you've got like an alert pendant, if you're particularly vulnerable, you might have that. Several times, again, we've raised through partners and through coronial processes about the benefits of making sure it's linked to the fire service and to your smoke alarm. So it's just looking at the whole, if you like, support technology and building environment, and just trying to keep making the case in terms of it might seem like an amount of money now, but this can really save you money, save life going forward.
Well said, thank you. Stephen, so just to wrap this part up, has there been any data or studies around, I guess, R&D of how much money could be saved? Because presumably this is going to save firefighter time and arguably even more important, you know, lives.
Yeah, the government, under the old Office of Prime Minister, used to collect statistics on economics of fire. They still report on those, but they're so high level. We need to actually couple the government incident data with the insurance data. There's been some phenomenal studies, particularly done in America, where they introduced fire suppression to all federal buildings, to all schools, and they had a great reduction in any instance of life loss, but more so the property protection and the protection of that asset and that cultural resource. I often have American colleagues over in the UK, and they kind of smile and go, you could lose your life working in this building. It's not get any fire suppression. If we had fire suppression in every new residential high-rise block since 1990, we wouldn't have such a severe national building safety crisis and families hemorrhaging costs for the remedial works or wake and watch. And I like the combustible balconies. All American balconies have a sprinkler head above them to control that. When I speak to my Australian colleagues, they have barbecues on their balconies all the time. It's because the balconies are non-combustible. So there's ways to change it. The insurance sector is very vocal, and much of the fire sector as well, and the UK Fire Service, on the adoption of fire suppression. But we've got national mandates and regional variations. Every year it comes up, we need to mandate putting sprinklers in schools because we lose a couple of schools a week. It's costing us about 50 million a month in old statistics. And we could save those buildings. Most businesses that suffer a major fire, 3/4 of them don't make it. They have direct insured costs, but then it's all the indirect costs, which could be another 2/3 of their recovery, such as goodwill, loss of brand, loss of footfall, means many don't survive. Arson can also be used to mask insurance claims, but we're quite sophisticated on that now. If we have an insured asset, whether it's a commercial building or residential, the insurer may have a parallel investigation. If it's a hospital and the police or the CPS decides not to pursue an arson case, the security professional, local security manager, might determine to pursue a private prosecution, and we have had success in that to act as deterrents. So again, I feel as if I'm giving you lots and lots of kind of issues, some sprinkling off answers and solutions. Where I think I'm directing you to is, I think we need to go back to the Mayor of London to commission a task and finish group, especially as a follow-on to Grenfell, to the Grenfell inquiry adoption, and to also the emerging risks. Let's move the debate on. The Welsh Assembly did a very good arson prevention task group report just a couple of years ago, and that might be a template for us. And I think we need to pull in the bodies and look at emerging technology threats. We're all terrified of e-vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, and the instance of Fardesson House. Now think about people weaponising that. I'm aware of one project I'm not at liberty to discuss any more details on, but we are looking very closely at a range of threats out of lithium-ion battery technology, which has outstripped legislation and the new Office of Product Regulation. I'm not seeing too much out of them post-Grenfell. Can someone give them a little shake, please? So I think we've got the right will and intention. We need the focal point to move it forward. And the fire sector has very deep pockets. Come on, dig deep, especially after Grenfell profits. Put something back into the communities. If you get me the right campaign, I will donate to that campaign. I sponsor Young Professional Awards, I sponsor cadet groups, I sponsor all my news and press comments forever before Grenfell all gets donated to, any media fees gets donated to Burns Research or Children's Burns Research. I try and move it around each charity each year. But let's come together. Let's not see someone hurt again. Let's not see a little kid hurt. Let's not see a family being a victim of arson, as we've seen in the past couple of weeks in London. And then let's look after the most vulnerable of society. We've got the technology, we've got the will, we just need the right impetus to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Clark.
Yes, thank you. My questions are about councils, which I feel like we've covered in various bits, and I'm very grateful and delighted to hear Barnet mentioned twice. But unfortunately, this committee we don't just speak about Barnet and Camden, but the whole of London. I'm just wondering, either Charlie or Pam, is there anything else you'd like to say in regards to engagement between the LFB and their engagement with London's boroughs, or perhaps even the role of the borough commanders in engaging with our local boroughs?
Yeah, so thank you. And there was, if you look at my notes, you'll find that we deliberately haven't picked on Assembly members' home boroughs as such, although we can provide information accordingly. But it was just in terms of the wildfire, it was just something quite appropriate. I think if I reflect on the time myself and Pam have had in service, we've just had such a sea change in terms of going from a central-driven model to a localised model in terms of the borough commander. And the borough commander's role in terms of leading what can be up to 5 or 6 fire stations, 4 watches, is not to be underestimated. And we've got our borough risk management plans with the station delivery plans that give even more localised approach to that. So I think the role is absolutely key and it needs to carry on evolving. Now, part of that is actually, as we've touched on earlier, about just making sure that we're proactively within our community speaking to perhaps parts of the community we haven't always had that relationship with. It's about being advocate for good causes or events and just speaking out and being part and proud of being part of London. And some other, just to give you a couple of examples, Tower Hamlets using audit our inspection findings to work with partner agencies and action on fly tipping, which again is something that can then lead to particular challenges in terms of fire. We've got Redbridge going out looking at, again, the external urban-rural interface and particular work there about reducing fires. Westminster working with the City Council very closely around their public safety, so we've got overlapping and joint fire safety campaigns. So, and I know that Assembly members have always been active at going to not only their own boroughs but in others as well. I'd like to think that whenever you go out and you meet with our teams at a fire station or at Control or somewhere else, we're all going to be telling you a fresh story with an individual take on what's happening in our local community. Again, I think we have to be realistic. We've got boroughs that's got the population of a small country. So it really is, it's not underestimating the challenge in terms of scale, but that's part of, why London's so great. So that's where the other side of it is just around the partnerships, is because we know it's not a utopia, so every other agency is going to be struggling for resources to some degree. But that's why it's so important to have those borough partnerships, to look at what's the local situation, look at the data and where can you make a difference. And sometimes it's about inspiring people. People talked about our cadets, and one of the cadet activities was actually going out to communities and looking at things like waste management. Because if we can engage with our youth, and I think it speaks to a point that Stephen made, it's just about future leaders, because then we've not just got 102 fire stations on the land, but we've got, every borough's got access to a cadet unit. Our engagement, over 100,000 interactions in a year. So it's just trying to continuously challenge ourselves to leverage that. So hopefully that didn't sound too much like a speech, but just genuinely, I think it's such an important direction of change we've had over the last years that we just have to keep on moving in that direction.
Well, I think it does speak to the relationship and the way things are working now, that throughout this session, even without being asked directly about councils have come back as an answer, and I think that really reflects a good working. I'm going to come to you in a second, Stephen, don't worry. But just to say, to your point about, and I will embarrass Peter Johnson, who's the borough commander for Barnet, but, he invited me not long ago to the Barnet Multi-Faith Forum's Seder dinner that they were hosting at Finchley Fire Station, which I think is, it's just such a good example of how we're using not just the fire brigade, but their assets to bring the community together, and the very important work of working in partnership, which the Multi-Faith Forum does in abundance, but then to bring in the fire brigade into that as well. I thought it was just a really excellent example of how that works.
No, thank you. And it's hopefully as well, it's the ones that you don't hear about apart from accidentally, which shows the ground truth in terms of, and again, we've got a long way to go. We're not perfect. We've always said that. But just you hear about somebody who's been doing an event for the older persons in the community, bringing them all in because we know the impact of loneliness, for example, or friends of a certain parkland area or something like that. It's just about those little local things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. It's like Newham, each watch had a responsibility for a particular ward. So you're breaking it down even further, and again, it's just things that you can do like that can just, okay, what's this little section of the community like, and what can we do to really make some inroads there? And that's part of the value of the station delivery plans sitting underneath a borough risk management plan, because it's kind of taking what is, we can talk about strategies and plans, but actually if that's not delivered on the ground, it's just talk. So it's really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Stephen, I'm going to come to you. You can answer that question as well, but it's just a very related question: is what more can councils do to ensure they are proactively, helping to prevent arson locally?
I think I kind of came full circle in my work as a kind of professional looking at kind of housing estates and local authority structures in Scotland to come in full circle again post-Grenfell. One of the things we had to do was go in and actually support the local authorities' recovery. And that's how I know Charlie from the London Council's Fire Directors Group, where we all came in as heads of fire safety or directors with government, with the fire authority, with the insurance sector, with keynote speakers to actually resolve the problem of how do we recover from Grenfell. So that's the kind of the absolute apex. But down at a more community level is, I remember one housing officer, because I went in, it was a huge patch, a 256 high-rise post-Grenfell, and this very kind lady said, just know your patch. And that's the key thing for all council officers. We're public servants. We're there to help our constituents. And it is the toughest job in the world. I must admit, it's the toughest job in the world. But one of the first things that we must do as fire professionals set up a resident engagement fire safety committee, bring in our local police, Safer Neighbourhoods team, bring in our local fire service team. We had a very good campaign down in Lambeth because we're terribly worried about vulnerable persons post-Grenfell, that set up a new unit to essentially door knock on high-rise and do leaflet drops, do reach-outs, and then go and actually approach. And then we built that up to scheme days, estate days. I'm a Glasgow lad. We call them housing schemes rather than housing estates. And what we did was we reached out to the local fire service and built upon their home fire safety visits and trained my staff up, and then we went out and we actually did. So we actually got duplication. And anyone that didn't have a smoke detector or needed a bit of extra TLC or needed care in the community or adult care or extra care or rehoused even, we were the linchpin to that. We did have, unfortunately, some noisemakers on some of the committees, but one very sweet lady said, if you've got people like Steve taking care of it, you don't need me, I'm resigning. And we actually got the civic leader in the mail to sign a well-wish card, and we dropped off a nice bunch of flowers and invited back for our events. She was hugely supportive of a step change with a troubled local authority. I won't name it. And it's all about the people, and you get one shot at it. And it's very hard to recover when it goes badly wrong. And once you actually speak to the community campaigners, the community leaders and multi-faith groups and get to know them and they get to know you, you can achieve so very, very much. We need to build that in to the role rather than sitting behind that screen, looking at risk registers, looking at numbers, thinking about how am I going to manage 60,000, 120,000 premises. How do I better enable my residents? And then listen and follow up on their concerns. That's where you make and break it. And if you do have somebody like a gang, somebody being terrorised by a gang, setting fire to refuge bins, get on that quick, get it knocked down, and do a multi-agency approach, and it sends a message out. But it's about relationships. I think we could probably do a separate session on that. I'd love to get all the council leaders together and then give them some sort of a brief with our partners on different levels of post-Grenfell response. What worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do for the future? And that's an open offer through this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you very much for the offer. Assembly Member Hall.
The question I wanted was answered, but I just want to say this is why borough commanders are so important. In Harrow over the years, we've had some brilliant ones who've had tea parties for the elderly and given out the messages, and we've had some that haven't been seen and didn't come to, and I'm going back a long time, I'm not referring to anybody in place now, didn't get involved at all. And the multi-agency working is so important, and that's why the borough commanders are far more important than I think they realise, that they get involved in all of this, because exactly what you've been saying is true.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all three of you. That's been a fascinating discussion. I thought it was quite a specific topic, which it was, but we've been all over the place in good ways. I think nothing happens in a silo. We've got a few more items of business to attend to, so please feel free to leave the chamber or hang out if you want to hear our items of business. Assembly members, can we note the report and today's discussion, and can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output from the discussion? Thank you. Can we note the committee's work programme and its meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on 6th of May 2025?
Noted.
Thank you. The date of the next meeting of the committee is 1st of July 2025, 10 a.m. in the chamber at City Hall. I have no urgent business. I therefore declare this meeting to be closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.